My dear brothers and sisters, in these days, there is a question we all face. How do we face difficulties? Our gospel reading today helps us to reflect on this challenge. There are three different groups in the gospel, actually four. You begin first with the disciples who, in the beginning of the story, confronted with the man born blind, ask Jesus, who sinned, the man or his parents? The second group in this would be the Pharisees, who play an important part questioning Jesus' miracle as well as who he is. A third group, not mentioned in the short form, are the parents of the man born blind. They are important because they can witness he was born blind. But then they deny him. They deny their only son to save their own reputation. There is the blind man himself at the center of the story. So how do we face difficulties? Like the disciples, some of us might believe that any kind of misfortune is indeed a punishment for sin. Like the blind man's parents, we too might be wary of standing in support of another person, even if it is someone we love, because we fear that our own status may be in jeopardy. Like the man born blind himself, we might be amazed at how God can work wonders in our lives. So is misfortune really a punishment for sin? That's a very difficult question to answer, especially for us here in Hong Kong in recent months, where we have faced so much from social upheaval and violence to the present, where not only us, but the whole world now faces a mysterious, contagious virus that we can neither see nor sense is near us. And yet people all around are suddenly infected and hospitalized, and some die. More than ever now, we can see that there are times when we do suffer the consequences of our foolish and malicious behavior, ignoring the warnings we hear nearly every day now, ignoring personal hygiene, ridiculing social distancing, and placing others, even those we love, in danger because of our own foolishness. And yet, our gospel today also assures us that misfortune is not always a punishment for sin. The story of the man born blind doesn't demonstrate his sinfulness at all, but it addresses the problem of religious openness and insight, something that happens even before he regained physical sight. This man obeys Jesus' direction and washes in the sacred pool of Siloam. He then goes on to respond with honest directness to the many questions of the Pharisees about the miracle, even when he faces ridicule and eventually is rejected and thrown out of the synagogue. Finally, his openness to believing in Jesus at the end of the story is without guile or condition. The man's blindness is certainly not the consequence of any sin. And what about the parents of the man? They are faced with a serious choice. Should they support their son in the claims that he now makes about his restored sight? Or should they protect their own status before the religious authorities? Sadly, they choose the latter part, and they abandon their son to the skepticism and scorn of the Pharisees. So we can ask, who in this story really is blind? Who really suffers from blindness? The Pharisees, the religious leaders, refuse to see what is right before their eyes. That is, that a man who was born blind now sees. The man's parents admit the wonder of his healing, but they lack the religious insight to accept that this is a gift that comes from God, and the courage to support their son in his moment of trial fails them. Only the man born blind possesses both sight and faith. Hearing this gospel story, we should wonder, why is it that we often ourselves remain in darkness and in blindness? Is it because of a sense of rigid insistence on some rule, such as the excuse of the Pharisees? Let's not make a mistake. Jesus was going against the law. He did something that was considered very incorrect at the time. He broke the Sabbath rule and healed someone on the Sabbath. Despite this breaching of the law, the religious leaders are themselves blind because they refuse to acknowledge the divine power of God that operates outside of structures that humans create, a religious system. The Pharisees refuse to accept God's freedom, and so they are blind to the miracles that divine freedom can accomplish. They see only what they want to see. At other times, we are blinded by fear. All around us these days, we are experiencing blinding fear. We fear the unseen virus. We are afraid of how others might see or judge us by our actions at this time. In the gospel, the blind man's parents feared standing up to support and defend their son. Sometimes we fear standing up for what is right, and we close our eyes and choose not to acknowledge the truth. When we act this way, we blind ourselves to the wonders that are still unfolding before our very eyes. We see only what we want to see. In our first reading from the book of Samuel, we have another lesson about another type of blindness that comes from judging a person's looks or stereotyping them. We judge someone as being too young or too old, or they are not the right gender, or not from the right ethnic background or class. They may lack power or wealth or importance in our eyes. how much these days we play that out in so many different places. Recently, there was a video that went viral, not to use a bad word now, on the internet, of people trying to get on a plane, one of the last planes out of an airport in recent days. And a man shouted over everyone else on the line to the agent, and he screamed, "Do you know who I am?" And the agent, without a pause, took the microphone and said, "Attention, please. There is a man here who doesn't know who he is," and continued doing her work. She put him in his place. Sometimes we think we are more important than we really are. Samuel was looking for a king. He sees the sons of Jesse, and he's looking at the oldest, the strongest, the biggest, the most robust. But this is not what God was seeking. He couldn't consider the possibility of David, the youngest. Yet this is the one on whom God's favor would rest. When we close our eyes to what a person might become or what they might accomplish, we see only what we want to see. St. Paul reminds us in the letter to the Ephesians that we heard this morning that in the past we all suffered some form of spiritual blindness. In past times, we lived in a form of darkness. But now, thanks to faith in Jesus Christ, we are called to be, in Paul's words, children of light, for light produces every kind of goodness and righteousness and truth. We are no longer blinded by rigidity or fear or prejudice. We are now called to open our eyes to the light, and with such faith and hope, take courageous steps into the future, just as our catechumens, the elect who are preparing for baptism, are doing at this time. Brothers and sisters, as we struggle to open our eyes, and to live in the light of Christ, we can take inspiration from the beautiful responsorial psalm. Even though I walk in the dark valley, I fear no evil, for you are at my side. Yes, the Lord is our shepherd, protecting us from all harm, leading us on the right path, and giving us repose. We can walk fearlessly and courageously through darkness with God as our shepherd and guide. We no longer are caught up seeing only what we want to see. With Jesus, the Good Shepherd, we choose to see what He wants us to see. That's what a good shepherd does. He guides the sheep not where they want to go, but where they should go, following in His footsteps. In these days and weeks of doubt and fear, can we choose light and all the responsibilities that that choice will entail? Let us keep faith and hope that God is eager to restore all of us to sight. Are we ready, as the blind man in the gospel was, to get up and to wash in the waters of salvation so that we too might see?